Okay, part 4 of Federalist number 18. We were in the middle of paragraph 7, which I mentioned in the last video how these members of this league, Amphictyonic League, even though on paper, in theory, they were supposed to be making a great league to defend themselves and their holy sites, the bigger, more powerful cities and members would take advantage of the weaker ones, and also whenever there was one member that was thought to have not cooperated well, if one side wanted to kick that member out, the other side would find that it would be to their disadvantage and would want to stop that. And then I told you of the similarity of how in the United States at the beginning, in first part of the 19th century, like from 1820 to 1860, especially from 1820 to 1850, how the southern states wanted to make sure that they had the balance of power, the slave-owning states as with the supposedly free states, non-slave-owning states. They wanted to keep the balance of power in the Senate, and they kept on making compromises, and finally they could not compromise. So the similarities are there. Madison says in this paper that when a confederation when a union is a weak confederation, you will always find members that will want to take advantage of others, and that will eventually lead to a war or multiple wars. Okay, I'll start reading again. This piece of history proves at once the inefficiency of the Union, the ambition and jealousy of its most powerful members, and the dependent and the degraded condition of the rest. The smallest members, though entitled by the theory of their system to revolve in equal pride and majesty around the common center, had become in fact satellites of the orbs of primary magnitude. Remember this last sentence, we've talked about it before. After Galileo and after the scientists had found the heliocentric world, the fact that it was the sun that stood still and the other planets went on different orbits around the sun. He's talking about that, how they stayed in their orbs, attracted to it, attached to it. He said the same way, even though the smaller members of these leagues were supposed to be equal, but we find that they were being harassed, they were being pushed around, they were being taken advantage of, and they were told that they need to go around the major players, the major powers, just like the earth goes around the sun, the moon goes around the earth. So they have to stay in their proper place. They have to know what their place is. In other words, they're going to be at a lower place, at a lower level, not as important as the more powerful ones. So he again is sharing with us that these leagues, just like our first constitution, the Articles of Confederation, in theory they're okay, but in practice they are not. It says we have found out what it was like under the Articles of Confederation during the Revolutionary War and afterwards. You can never count on things to go well. You can never count on the states to do their job right, to meet the requirements that were needed from them. So that is why we've given you this new constitution, and we are asking you to deliberate on it and ratify it and accept it if you find it that it's going to be agreeable to your future peace and prosperity and happiness. Then he goes to the next paragraphs. Had the Greeks, says the Abby Melot, I'm not sure about the correct pronunciation of this, been as wise as they were courageous, they would have been admonished by experience of the necessity of closer union, and would have availed themselves of the peace which followed their success against Persian arms to establish such a reformation. This writer was a French historian, and Madison had got several books, as I told you, from Jefferson, and one of them was this book by this historian. And he seems to be one of those historians that in 18th century, he apparently died in 1785, that his books and his writings were very much in favor of, supportive of, learning from ancient history and applying it to the current situation. So he was one of the ones that had said we can learn from the Greek and Roman histories and apply it to better our situation. And that's why Madison here says, this writer says, if the Greeks were wiser, they would have made a stronger union, and this way they would not have fallen prey and been a toys in front of the future countries or groups of people that would eventually dominate them. Instead of this obvious policy, Athens and Sparta, inflated with the victories and the glory they had acquired, became first rivals and then enemies. He says after their stand against the Persians, after they defeated the Persians, instead of becoming a stronger union, they started being prideful and not really forming this union, and before you know it, before not too long, they became each other's enemies and did each other infinitely more mischief than they had suffered from Xerxes. And eventually, after they became enemies, they even damaged each other more than the Persians had done. Their mutual jealousies, their two-sided distrust, fear, hatred, and injuries ended in the celebrated Peloponnesian War, which itself ended in the ruin and slavery of Athenians who had begun it. The Peloponnesian War, I've already mentioned it, was a 30-year war with just a short break in between, short intermission between Athens and Sparta, and made them both weak. And at the end of the day, Athens was no longer the glory it had been. And that's the lesson Madison wants to tell the American people by writing this. He says, we too can, if we act like Athens and Sparta did, if we don't unite in a stronger union, then we will be falling prey. We will be the weak power that European powers will come and ruin our future. They will divide us. They will put distrust amongst us, and they will forever benefit from us, and they'll be to our loss and maybe final destruction. Just like the Peloponnesian War destroyed Athens, we might go to war against one another if we don't unite and destroy ourselves.